So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I am so thrilled to have the amazing Dr. Longo with us today. I'm going to give a short introduction and then he's going to take over. Dr. Valter Longo is the director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California School of Gerontology in LA, one of the most important centers for research on aging and age-related diseases. Professor Longo is also the director of the Longevity and Cancer Research Program at the IFOM Institute of Molecular Oncology in Milan in Italy. In 2018, Professor Longo was named by Time magazine one of the 50 most influential people in the world in the field of health for his research regarding longevity and the prevention of the most serious diseases. So we are so thrilled and so honored to have here with us Dr. Valter Longo. Welcome. And we'd like to know, can you give us an update on the field of fasting and what's going on, what's new and exciting?
Yes, thanks, Audrey. Thanks for the introduction. So there is, I think the 2022 will represent the year where lots of the clinical trials on the fasting mimicking diet came around. I just saw one that was published by a group that I didn't know was even working on the fasting mimicking diet. And they were looking at the effect of the fasting mimicking diet on microbiota and some of these molecules that are believed to be toxic generated by the gut. And this trial, I think, just came out about a week ago with this very positive results, but I just saw it today. But just to tell you how many trials are coming out. So we have one on hypertension that is going to be published soon, one on diabetes that is going to be published soon. And in the last year or two, we published a number on cancer. But more so lots of hospitals, oncology hospitals from around the world. So I think it's a very exciting year just because of this transformation from a few trials to many trials and a few groups doing it to many groups now looking at these interventions which this FMD, which can be done in trials usually once a month, but then by the general population maybe 3 or 4 times a year. And so of course the potential disruption is the potential for disruption is very high because it doesn't require major changes in the diet and what people want and like to do. And I remind you also of most of you probably didn't see it, but for the longest time, and I'm not advertising bad diets here, but for the longest time, people were asking me, isn't there something you can do to allow me to continue to eat whatever I want and smoke? I had people actually come up to me and say, can I keep smoking? Do you have anything for me? And I always thought that's just a bad idea. But then finally, we finished a study in animals, which we published 6 months ago in Nature Metabolism. And so we took animals and we kept them on a very high fat, high calorie diet, and they became big. And then we took the same diet, same animals, and put it on the same on this diet plus 5 days amount of the FMD. And first of all, it was incredible how the Western bad diet, how bad the effects were. So it shortened their lifespan, it damaged their heart, the cholesterol was sky high, et cetera, et cetera. And the unbelievable part was the FMD reversed everything that the bad diet did. So 25 days amount of a really bad diet and then 5 days amount of the FMD was enough to reverse everything, which is, I think it was more than we were hoping for. We were hoping for something in between, but wow. But so there was interesting. So anyway, so that's just a very general update without going to the details, but lots of clinical trials and the Create Cures Foundation should have them up. All the papers are usually uploaded on the createcures.org website. So we try to keep posting them so that people can read them and evaluate them for themselves.
That's wonderful. I have a question about those rats. So how many rounds of the FMD did they do?
So we started, let's say, the equivalent of a 35-year-old, right? and then we went all the way to the end of life. So once a month they would do this, and then go back to the really bad diet. So yeah, it was
Interesting.
impressive. Yeah.
So I have a question. So listen, I have a list of questions from many people, and we're thrilled that we have you, the guru, the fasting man, to answer these questions. So I'm going to jump in, and then I'm going to field some of the questions that we're getting in the chat. And for all of you listening, I just want you to know that this is being recorded, and an email will be going out in about 1 week with this recording. So you'll be receiving that. So my first question to you: how is it possible that we can fast with food? I hear that it doesn't tap into a food sensing system in the body, the food sensing pathways. Can you please explain that a little bit more? Is it about the caloric load, or is it the macronutrient balance that allows us to fast with food?
Yes, it's about both, right? So in 2008, 2009, we were doing our first clinical trial at USC Norris Cancer Center with cancer patients, and we thought, of course, they're going to do a water-only fast. If they believe it could help them, they're going to finish it. But we were surprised, and lots of them didn't want to do it, didn't want to be part of the trial. The oncologists were worried, so we thought the doctors are worried, patients are worried, we're worried. And now it seems like, oh, of course. But back then, everybody was scared about putting people on a single day of a fasting, water-only fasting diet. And so and then we went to the National Cancer Institute, National Institute on Aging of the NIH, and basically asked for funding to develop a fasting mimicking diet, right? So the calories is very important, but the composition is maybe even more important than the calories. So the idea is to trick the system into responding as if there was only water coming in. So the proteins, but not just the proteins levels, but also the protein types, right? So the protein coming from a legume is very different from the protein coming from a nut, and it's very different from the protein coming from fish or meat, right? So the protein type and levels are important. The sugars, low sugar, low refined starches, in the high fat, but the type of fat is also important. So, and this is just part of what goes in the FMD. Of course, there's much more than that.
So you just knew that there was a way that we could trick the body, and that we could actually eat food and it wouldn't tap into those food sensing pathways. You just knew that and figured there has to be a way to create this. Yeah.
Well, we were trying to achieve two things, right? So I had come from the laboratory of Roy Walford, and Roy, even back in the early 90s, was the world most famous expert in nutrition and aging, right? And what he was working on was calorie restriction. So, and it was a simple idea, which, it succeeded and failed both, right? So the calorie restriction was like, well, what if you take people that are normal weight, normal diet, and reduce that by 25% and don't touch the composition? And so a lot of benefits and a lot of problems, right? And so from then, I started thinking, first of all, what if you did water-only fasting? All our original, so I started working in 1992 on bacteria starving, then moved to people and mice starving, and then moved to yeast starving. And then, so I've always worked on starvation and fasting. But then at a certain point, I said, what if we just do water-only fasting for a certain number of days a month, and then go back? Are there long-term effects? And nobody knew, right? Nobody was working on this, right? So some people were doing very long fasts, let's say lasting a month. There were some clinics that have been around for 100 years. But nobody was doing this like quick, let's say 4 or 5 days type of water-only fasting, and then going back to the normal diet for 1, 2, 3 months. And that was the gamble, right? So is it possible that you just do that and this is going to last for a long, long time? Yeah. So then that was the focus. And then, of course, the second focus was, can we let people eat and still get these benefits, right? So together, I thought this could really make a difference in medicine. and in health and in longevity. And this could be in the toolkit of every doctor. Now it becomes very reasonable. How often do I have to do it? Maybe every 3 months or 4 months for 5 days. Do I have to starve? No, you can eat. Is there any danger to it? Very, very little, right? So we were worried about blood pressure dropping, glucose dropping. So there's a lot of things that, may only happen in 10, 20, 30% of the people. But when you're reaching, going after millions and millions of people or tens of millions of people, you cannot say, oh, only 10% will have this problem. So then everything in the fasting mimicking diet is not just to achieve fasting effects, is also to avoid people ending up, having side effects. Right. And that's as important as the first goal.
Absolutely. Okay. So we know that it's very different from a water fast. Aside from the fact that we're actually eating food, what else would be like the biggest differentiator between that 5-day water fast and 5-day FMD?
Yeah, as I was saying before, I mean, fasting, every 50 years, the world gets excited about fasting. And 5 years later, the medical community goes against fasting and it disappears, right? So somebody dies and there's, people can die from bad use of fasting, like let's say drugs plus a disease plus fasting. Mm-hmm. So, and people take drugs and people have diseases and people, can do this at the same time and do fasting. So I think it's very important to move away from ideas like water only fasting and move, unless we want to keep taking lots of drugs, right? So for people that want to keep taking lots of drugs, then okay. But for everybody else, I think it's important to say, okay, can we really finally use food as drug? And can we use this food to cause changes that are systemic and they're really going after the root cause of problem? So if you're insulin resistant and you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, we want to bring you back, right? And if you have inflammatory bowel disease, what is the autoimmunity that is causing that? Why? What is it attacking, right? And if you have cancer or precancerous cells, let's kill them preferentially, but let's not kill the other cells, right? So then long answer to say, let's not just use, fasting means absolutely nothing, right? So it's just like eating. Is eating good for you? It's good and it's bad and it's neutral. And fasting is the same way. So this is a fasting mimicking diet, have the job of, let's get it tested clinically, and let's have more and more clinical trial. Let's test it in mice, and let's test it in people. Eventually, we're going to have epidemiological data on all the people that do the fasting mimicking diet out there. So we're going to have millions of people. So slowly collecting data on the fasting mimicking diets, and then that's what we need to get out there, and not water only fasting, which we and every expert in the world will say is not safe unless you're in a clinic, specialized clinic. And there are very good clinics, the Bookinger Clinic, the True North Clinic. So there are places that you can go to do water only fasting. We're not against it, but for the people that are going to stay home, that's just a bad idea. So I don't even want to get into the discussion of, well, is this better than that? Well, it needs to be tested. This is why we have the FDA, and people can argue that the FDA overdoes it, but lots of people and every doctor in the world will argue against it, right? So let's try to come up with something that the doctors can say, okay, this I can get behind.
Yes.
And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing tens of thousands of doctors all over the world that are starting to say, okay, you're doing it right? So now I'm starting to think maybe there's an alternative to these drugs, because you are going to the FDA, you are doing many clinical trials, and at a certain point, I'm going to be convinced that it's safe and it's effective for my patients.
It makes so much sense. I think the safety factor just makes it superior. And it sounds as if we really are getting similar or even better results with FMD over a water fast. So it sounds pretty excellent. Okay. So fasting and FMD are considered a healthy aging and longevity diet. What is really the relationship between fasting and aging? fasting?
Yeah, again,
Yeah.
again, it's bad, good, and neutral, right? So yeah, so for the FMD, I can say that now we have lots of studies, we and others. So we and many labs have used it against cancer. We use it we demonstrated cancer prevention. We demonstrated cancer treatment, particularly in combination with drugs in cancer. It happens to be good mostly if you combine it with the standard of care drugs. For diabetes, not at all, right? The FMD alone is very powerful, right? And then if you do FMD plus a good diet, it's even better. Yeah, so I think that FMD cycles, as we've shown in, of course, you cannot do a human longevity study, but we've now done many clinical trials on humans. And if you look at systemic inflammation, levels of cholesterol, blood pressure, fasting glucose, and now we're doing biological age. So in a few months, we're going to publish on biological age, right? Though using various systems. So yeah, if you put all this together, then you get the sense that it's affecting the aging process. And by affecting the aging process and more, it's affecting all these risk factors and biomarkers for aging and diseases.
So not only will we age health, it's more about aging healthy without disease. Really, that's the whole point here. I mean, we all want to live a lengthy life, yet we want to be healthy while living that long life. So
yeah, I think it's about aging more slowly.
okay.
And I think, and we started to demonstrate this pretty clearly in the mouse studies, is also turning a little bit the clock back, right? So we damage, for example, the pancreas of mice, and then we see that the FMDs and refeeding cycles, and that's another interesting thing, that the refeeding seems to be as important as the fasting mimicking diet. Why? Well, probably because we see the FMD, and I'm just going to call it FMD from now on. The FMD turns on the stem cells and these regenerative, embryonic-like regenerative programs. Why is that? Well, probably back in the history of many different organisms, the starvation moment represents a moment where you get rid of a lot of junk, and then you shrink, right? So you get rid of damaged components and you shrink. And this may justify why it kills cancer cells. It kills autoimmune cells. It reverses or may kill insulin resistant cells. But then when you refeed, when you go back to the normal diet, this is the moment where you rebuild. So now we see all these developmental genes. So the set of genes that you will only see in a newborn baby or even early in the embryo. So those are on, right? So that's all turned on, and you never see this in adults. So this is telling us, at least in the mice, that there is a regenerative program, very coordinated one, that is being turned on during this fasting refeeding. And so this is actually turning the clock back. Why? Because now whether it's the liver, the muscle, the pancreas, the gut, the brain, we see these stem cells going to work and regenerating tissue. Now, it doesn't mean now for the blood, we could actually demonstrate that you can start from stem cell, what's called long-term stem cell, hematopoietic stem cells. So you can start from those, and they essentially rebuild the entire immune system. But in most cases, because we first irradiate the mice, get rid of the immune system, and then rebuild it, right? But in most cases, but that tells you how powerful this is, right? So from a single set of stem cells, now you can rebuild the immune system of a mouse. So of course now we know that this can be done, and and so yeah, this is to underline the potential to rejuvenate and not just delay the aging process.
So when you mentioned refeeding, does that mean that soon after you are done with your FMD, those following days, that what you put in your body at that point is very, very important?
Yes, absolutely, right. So imagine so in a sense, the fasting and the FMD is a moment of taking an old building and tear it down. But once you tear down the building, if you just stop there, then you have nothing. Yeah. But if you get new bricks and new cement, et cetera, you can build a new building, brand new. And yeah, that's what we did for the immune system, right? So now to rebuild that immune system, of course, you have to have enough proteins, enough amino acids, essential fatty acids, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Even cholesterol becomes important, right? So yeah, so then lots of the things that might be bad now become essential for the rebuilding process. And yeah, so then you have to have a good diet. And this is why we also, with cancer patients, we alternate the FMD with a reasonably, a very good diet, but also a reasonably high nourishment diet.
I understand. That's wonderful information. Okay, so I get a lot of questions. How many times can we do FMD per year? And can it be done every single month? Are there any negatives to doing it monthly?
Yeah, I always say that you should do it when you need to do it. Eventually, we're going to have data for millions and millions of people. And then it might turn out that people that do it once a month, they're incredible and they're much younger, et cetera, et cetera. So we've done that in the diabetes clinical trial once a month, and people were fine. No, we did it for a year, once a month for a year, and the patients could finish it, but they had diabetes, right? So it made sense to say do it once a month. Everybody else, I think, if somebody is healthy or very healthy, 3 or 4 times a year should be the goal. And then, but then, yes, if you're trying to solve a problem, you have a real problem to solve, then it's a different story. You may have to do things, so nobody wants to get 4 COVID vaccination, right? But right now, you don't have much of a choice, right? So you want COVID or you want 4 COVID vaccinations. There's a lot of arguing over that, right? Well, so why do you get that? Well, in special situations like this, it's better to get 4 COVID vaccines than to risk getting COVID. And that's the same thing with all kinds of conditions and diseases. You have something, there's a small chance that many cycles of the FMD could have some side effects. We haven't seen any yet, but that doesn't mean that, we cannot think that everything is going to be completely free of side effects. Although I did design it with this in mind, right? So there are, in the FMD, there are more carbohydrate than I could have put in. There are more starches than I will want to put in, et cetera, et cetera. The ketone bodies are going to get high, but I don't want them to get too high. So there's a lot of things that people might even criticize and that were placed in there to make sure that you don't have these continuous yo-yo issues that, could cause problems, even though we don't have evidence for it yet.
Okay. Speaking of doing it a number of times, could this increase metabolism or could it slow metabolism down by doing it a number of times a year?
Yeah. So a very good question, and this goes back to mechanisms, my studies, human clinical trials. So if you do an FMD, let's say you do 1 day, right? By day 1, and then you stop. By day 1, you haven't even depleted most likely all your sugar storage, like glycogen, right? So you might start depleting it, but you might not even be there, depending on how much you had to eat. And so the food is going to get digested, and then you have glycogen. So by day 2 to 2.5, you're starting to get there. And then between day 3 and 4, your hunger goes down because your body now switches into a full ketogenic mode. And so now you get, most people would say, get 2.5 days benefit of, okay, now I don't feel hungry, particularly after you do it 2 or 3 times. And now you enter this ketogenic, this fasting response mode, and you're fine. So this is how we came up with 5 days. So you can start on a Monday and you can be finished by Friday. Now, what if you went to 10 days? Well, now we know from lots of studies, clinical studies on calorie restriction and not just in severe restrictions, that eventually, and it could be, we don't know, but it could be already starting day 7 or 8 or 10, your body starts responding now the opposite way. Now it goes into a thrifty mode. Why? Because after 10 days on no food or 15 days on no food, it will have to adjust to not risk running out of food, right? So it's going to start slowing metabolism. and it slows metabolism. This is like, maybe 20 years ago, there's a New England Journal of Medicine paper on this, showed that your metabolism now slows even past your weight loss. So you lose weight, but then your metabolism slows even more than your weight loss, right? So per kilogram of body weight. What does that mean? That if you get into that switch, now you could be sort of condemned in a way to regain weight. Because why? Because 10,000 years ago, that's exactly what you want, right? You want to save energy, make it through the very rough winter when there is no food, and so keep the weight, and don't waste energy unless you have to. Now we're in a different world, right? Now the lucky people are the ones that have a high metabolism. So the last thing you want to do is slow down your metabolism. Yes. And I keep in mind there's at least some evidence that this switch could last a long time. It could last potentially years, right? So now once you enter into this thrift mode, you could be stuck there for a long time. This is why people, they lose weight and they tend to go back to the weight they came from, right? Because the evolution set the weight and understand at that weight, you're fine. So now you lost a lot of weight. Let me bring you back there because I know you were fine at that weight, right? So, and it takes a long time for those people to eventually, let's say you weigh 130, right? And then you go to 115. Well, those 15 pounds, the system for many people is going to be set up to go back to 130, maybe for years, right? And that's probably epigenetic, what's called epigenetic switches, that, so the DNA gets modified and it's telling you, get back there because I'm not sure about this new weight, right? I'm worried that you're going to run out of food. And again, 10,000 years ago, that's the difference between life and death.
Yes. Very interesting. So that's why it's so important after FMD to transition back to your regular food and to not extend this into day 6, day 7, day 8 through 10. We want to get back to a nourishing diet. And then if you decide that you want to do FMD again, wait another month. So it's very important.
Well, or more, right? Yeah.
Or even more.
2 or 3 months. Yeah.
Okay.
I think in our mouse studies, we looked at the fat breakdown, right? So the mice go from the FMD to a normal diet, then we wait, and then we look 4 days after and 2 weeks after. And what you see is that exactly what we were hoping to see, that if you keep the FMD 4 to 5 days, now the fat breakdown mode continues, right? Even after the mice return to the normal diet. And that's what you want, right? You want the organism to keep breaking down and using fat, not turning into the fat storage modality, which then is going to get you in trouble.
So what I find interesting, and this is another question that comes up often, is why do some people not lose any weight on FMD? Others lose a lot of weight, and some gain it all back and some don't, even in the conditions of eating a healthy diet, and they're not going crazy afterwards, but they're just going back to healthy food. Any thoughts on this as to why someone doesn't lose weight, loses a lot of weight, and then the alternative, gaining it all back?
Yes, I mean, weight doesn't mean much, right? Because weight could be water, right? It could be fat. It could be food that you have in your body. Mm-hmm. And it's also the response. So are you potentially unlocking that epigenetic or whatever other plaque you might have or not? Maybe for some people, they could have gone 6 days or 7 days, and that will have been the unlucky moment. So we don't know. Okay. We see the great majority. I mean, in the clinical trials, we see the great majority of people. We do these scatter plots, so we see how many people lose weight and how many people many people gain weight and how many people are not affected. And so the great majority of the dots are in the weight loss group. But yeah, few people, let's say, gain weight. Probably very, very few. But some people don't change. And so that's an interesting science question. But I would say for over 90% of the people in the trials, we see some form of weight loss. And I would say for at least 60-70%, there is a major weight loss. And the good news, now we confirm this, there's a temporary reduction in muscle mass, in lean body mass. But then as they refeed now the third trial showing the same, the lean body mass, the muscle mass goes back to normal, but the fat does not, of course. So you burn fat, but you're able to maintain, thus far in all three trials, all the muscle mass.
Okay. And why, I'm just going to hop over to something. We have a lot of questions, so I want to try to get to as many as possible. So there is a question about why is it a 3-month fast that's recommended. Now I think it's more 3 to 4 cycles in a row. Why is that the ultimate sort of prescription for doing FMD? Why not once or twice, but now it's a recommendation of 3 or 4?
Because of the clinical trials, right? So in the clinical trials, most people, let's say, over 70% of people in the United States are overweight or obese, right? So you start, and let's say there is probably another 10% that are borderline, right? They're not quite there, but so now you're looking at 80%, 85%. And then there's the people that might be overweight, fat percentage-wise, but not body percentage-wise. So they might have 31% fat, but yet be of normal weight. Well, they're going to be overweight, right? So, and if they have, I think 32% fat or more, now they're obese, even though they're normal weight, right? So yeah, so different people start with a problem, and the 3 to 4 cycles is what we tested clinically, and they're there to get you from, okay, you have a problem, to you're on your way to a solution. Probably also because of this switch from the fat storage mode to the fat burning mode, right? So in the summer, connecting back to what I just said, in the summer, if you look at emperor penguins, if you look at a lot of species, they gain weight, right? So when there's food, they gain weight, and they become either obese or certainly overweight. And why? Well, they're storing the fat, and then it's going to be used later on. And so then you're in a fat storage mode, which connects to what I was saying earlier about the slowing of the metabolism.
Yes.
But it's also insulin resistant. So the system becomes resistant to the effect of insulin, so it can store fat. So there's a lot of insulin, and a lot of the energy now is diverted into fat. Well, the 3 cycles or the 4 cycle of the FMD switch that, right? So the first cycle, like you were saying, may not do it. So you might go to second or third cycle. By the third cycle, the great majority of people are going to be in this now winter mode, right? So now you're on your way. You're no longer stuck in saving fat, but you're now on your way to reverse your pre-diabetes, diabetes, and other conditions of insulin resistance. Okay. So yeah, and then not just insulin resistance. Also, if there's an inflammation, we see C-reactive protein go down, yeah, so there's a lot of conditions that probably benefit from this heavy attack early on.
It's like, I like that heavy attack. It's a perfect.
And then, then each person, might move to different strategy. Of course, if you're still morbidly obese, you might continue, let's say, every one or two months. But, if you're now back to almost normal, now you can get to the once every 4 month modality.
Wonderful. That's terrific. Thank you. Okay. As a dietitian, we are taught that cancer patients usually have higher calorie and protein needs, but I've read about some of your work, and you suggest that perhaps fasting or following FMD may have preventative or curative effects for patients with cancer. What if someone has, I've never heard of this.
Cachexia, yeah.
Okay. Can you elaborate?
So with modern cancer treatment, there is less and less of the cachexia. There is, but there is less. And let's say for hormone therapy, for example, oftentimes you have, which is one of the top cancer treatments in the planet, oftentimes you have the opposite. The patient gains weight, and the weight gain is now associated with a worse progression, free survival. And so for lots of patients, that's not a problem. For some patients, it's a problem. And that's where the dietitian and the physician and the oncologist, I think, should form a team that strategize. So I struggle with that, because even in our own clinical trials, the diet experts will be against me and saying, oh, even as part of the trial, I'm not going to allow you to dose the proteins between one cycle and FMD and the other. And I lost that fight, believe it or not, even in the trial. But what happened in that trial, we saw women with breast cancer gaining muscle mass. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Now we had women that had the normal muscle mass, and now they're like loaded with these proteins between cycles, and now they're gaining muscle mass when we should really have been worried about the cancer progression. So that's why the team is so important, because now the dietitian, and using impedantiometry, etc., phase angle measurements determines the muscle function, muscle mass. Is it good? Yes, it's good. So let's keep it there. Let's keep it as low protein as needed to avoid cachexia, to avoid muscle wasting, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, if you start getting in that direction, moving in that direction, then the doctor and the dietitian have to intervene to make sure that you don't get the patient to be frail, because now you're starting, then you could be in trouble, right? So if the patient is losing lots of weight and lots of muscle mass, that could get you into a trouble situation. Even for the immune system and for the role of the immune system in fighting the cancer, right? So you weaken the immune system, now you can have a problem. So it's a little bit of a science and clinical practice and art to, make sure that the patient doesn't lose muscle mass, doesn't lose bone density, and at the same time, you're fighting as hard as possible the survival of the cancer cells.
Thank you. Can we speak for a moment about the L drink? There are often concerns about having can I have more of it? Do I have to have that exact dosage based upon my weight? And we know that the L drink is there to help prevent that lean body mass loss. And so could you just speak to that for a moment on the benefits of it and why it's so important to have the exact dosage?
Yeah, so the exact dosage is weight associated. So no, you should not have more, and no, you should not have less, unless you have some allergy or reaction to it, which very few people should have. And yeah, it's there because it can be converted by the liver into sugar if needed, right? But if it's not needed, then it's common. It's part of the starvation response. So one of the things the fat produces is glycerol, right? Fatty acids and glycerol and eventually ketone bodies. And so that's why the L drink is there to be consistent with the fasting response, by making sure it protects you from the hypoglycemia that could occur. It also has other roles, so most people don't understand this. A lot of thinking goes into this FMD, and a lot of government and other funds that went into it. But it's also a mild laxative, right? So most of the clinics that do fasting, they do some colon cleanse, right, as part of the fast. Mm-hmm. And so that's another role of these is to cleanse, let's say, if you want to look at it like that, the as much as possible, or help cleanse as much as possible the colon, because of course we don't want people to have invasive procedures.
Okay. So the L drink does a variety of different things, from helping to hold on to that lean body mass and a little bit of a laxative effect. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Next question. This person has been water fasting only for a few years and has started FMD with his wife. For me, it seems like a lot of food in the box and only eat about half of the serving. Do I have to eat it all to benefit most from the program?
Yeah, I think the commercial products at some point need to come up with more variety, right? So consistent with the clinical data, consistent with the clinical composition, but also allowing people. So if somebody doesn't like olives, or doesn't like a particular fruit or vegetable, then they shouldn't be forced to have to eat it, right? So if somebody has an aversion to the food, so they can't stand it, Don't force yourself to eat it. It's okay if you don't eat it. But I hope that the commercial products that soon come up with the options that don't violate the results and the composition of the clinical trial tested FMD.
Okay. I'm a clinical psychologist and very interested in the relationship between food and mental illness. We know that fasting helps depression. Is there a way to learn more and become more involved with research or even educating patients? Is there much of a relationship?
Yeah, so we did a trial with the University of Palermo on the FMD and depression. They want to do a much larger one, so hopefully that happens. And we're talking to clinics that focus on depression about doing much larger interventions, where we look at hundreds of people. So yeah, we're open. We usually are open to anybody that wants to do trials, and we help them, and we help build the clinical trial and the ethical protocol. I mean, the protocol for the ethics committee. And yeah, so absolutely, of course, you can pick up my book, and it talks a little bit about that, probably not very much. But at some point, it'd be good to, as we have more data, it'd be good to write and educate people about it. Now, the good thing about this is why we're testing now in a clinical trial, the FMD with Alzheimer's patients. We're about halfway to the clinical trial. And the power of fasting is that it rewires brain metabolism, right? So after 5 days of FMD, the brain is no longer just being fueled by sugars, but is now being fueled by a combination of sugars and ketone bodies. And that's why we think it's so interesting to at least test it for depression, Alzheimer, Parkinson, et cetera, because there's a true rewiring of the brain. And the hope is that the rewiring is also sort of a reset of brain function. So we don't know, but it's good that we started with positive results from the first trial, and we'll see if that continues. When we look at hundreds of people.
Exciting. So what are your thoughts on the ketogenic diet, and do you recommend it? And what are your thoughts on doing an intermittent fasting when not doing FMD, whether it's the 16-8 or 14-10? I know you typically recommend a 12-hour fast. I'd love to know your thoughts on that, actually. Why only the 12 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the ketogenic diet, as sort of originally described, which is a very low carbohydrate diet, not just a low, but very low, let's say less than 50 grams or so of carbohydrate a day. Let me quote the Lancet meta-analysis, right? So one of the leading medical journals that showed that it's better to have an 80% carbohydrate diet for longevity than to have a low carbohydrate diet. Now, when you get to the ketogenic level, now you have a 60% increase, 60 in mortality compared to the 50 to 60% carbohydrate diet, right? And they just study after study, and I just wrote a review on this for the journal Cell, and please pick it up because it's public access, so you can go to cell.com and just download it. And yeah, so then study after study after study shows that low carbohydrate diet are associated with increased overall mortality, increased mortality from cardiovascular disease, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in the very low carbohydrate diet, we don't know because, of course, nobody. I mean, not. And let me make a distinction. So in the Harvard studies, if you look at the people, the low carbohydrate diets is usually like 35 to 40%, right? And so that group, if it's low carbohydrate but it's plant-based, they actually do very, very well, right? So if you get to say 35, 40%, I forgot, I think it was 37%. The lowest carbohydrate group was, because out there, if you just look at this, is nurses and doctors doing this, right? It's 120,000 people that they follow. So those that had the low carbohydrate diet, but it was high in plant-based sources, they were doing the best of everyone, right? Better than the plant-based sources, high carbohydrate diet, right? So So that tells you that, yeah, that might be like the best of the best. Fairly low carbohydrate, plant-based, not extreme. Then again, you could argue, well, how do you know that nobody is being studied that does 15% carbohydrate diet? So we don't know, but that's a big question mark, you know. So what will happen if you have a very low animal-based, very low carbohydrate diet for all your life? I wouldn't take my chances because we have so much data on the high carbohydrate diet, or let's say moderate carbohydrate, like 50 to 60%, whole grain based, et cetera, et cetera. And there is a study that just came out confirming this. So there's a Nature Medicine study that looked at millions of people in China, Europe, and the United States. And in fact, the number one factor associated with life expectancy increase was legume consumption. The second one was whole grain. So both of them high in carbohydrate. The third one, I think, was nuts. And then the negatives were red meat and processed meat. Yeah, so those were the and fish came out as okay, but again, supporting, and people that started this at 20 years of age, so high legume, high whole grain, high nuts, they had a increase 13 years increase if they were males, 13-year increase in life expectancy, and even if they started at 60, there was still 8 to 9 years increase in life expectancy.
So I have a question in regards to that higher, like whole grain and legumes. What happens if you have a patient that has some insulin resistance and really can't process, even though healthy carbohydrates, it's a lot of carbohydrate. So what do you recommend in a situation like that?
I'm not sure I understood the question.
So like if it's a 60% carbohydrate diet, for someone with some insulin resistance, that's a lot of carbohydrates for them to metabolize, isn't it?
Not really, no.
No?
Yeah, so it turns out that the protein levels and type may be even more important than, so if you have a high protein diet, that could get you a lot more in trouble than especially the complex carbohydrate. So again, the insulin resistance, we now have hundreds of patients that we follow at the 2 clinics, many clinical trials. So if it's legume, if the diet is legume, whole grain based, and then you have the FMD, you integrate the FMD, because in some patients we see, for example, I always show this one patient who was a physician, right? A physician that was taking lots of drugs. And then it goes on the longevity diet, and nothing changes, you know, for the insulin resistance. It stays insulin resistant, maybe fasting glucose around the 135. But it comes down just a little bit. And after 9 months, nothing happens. Then he starts the FMD, and then it drops, right? So you see that with the FMD. So it's a combination of the two that is pretty effective in the great majority of people. So yeah, so I think that's good. Now, it's not going to be good for everybody, but I would not be surprised if it's over 80% from what we've seen, you know, the combination of the longevity diet and the FMD. Of course, the FMD is also part of the longevity diet. And in there, I also have 12 hours of fasting, as you mentioned before, not 16 hours. Why not 16 hours? Because most people, they skip breakfast. Now there's meta-analysis showing shortened lifespan, more cardiovascular disease, potentially more cancer. These are associations, but there are now maybe 20 studies all showing the same, right? So that's not a good idea, right, to go in that direction. So the 16 hours could be good, maybe to get started, to get things going. Let's say 1 or 2 months of 16 hours just to move in the right direction. But then I will go to the longevity diet, the 12 hours of fasting, 12 hours of feeding. And one thing I will add is skipping lunch, right? I've been using it for 20 years, and me and lots of people we follow in the clinics works very well. And it really reduces the danger zone, right? Getting into these daily, very long fasting periods, which lots of people think are good for you, but they may turn out to be bad for you if they're over, let's say, 13 hours a day, right? So up to 13 hours, I always say I've never seen a negative study. Sachin Panda has done a lot of great work on that. And you know, as you get to 16, 15, 16, 18 hours, now you start to see a lot of negatives. Also, not just the breakfast keepers, but also you see negatives with gallstone, women that are at risk for gallstone operations. They're twice more likely, I think, to need a surgery if they're fasting regularly for 16 or more hours compared to the 10-hour faster.
Okay, thank you. So a woman here feels that she may have slowed down her metabolism by doing FMD too much. Could that have happened?
Well, it depends what too much is, right? So if somebody started doing 2 FMDs a month, that's possible, yeah. So now the thrifty mode could be triggered, right? And that's, some people get so enthusiastic and say, it worked, so let me just keep going. I can keep going. I hear this all the time, even in the clinical trials. And we say, no, don't keep going. Go back to your normal diet, going back to the longevity diet. And yes, absolutely. I think that we need to do more even at the commercial level. I mean, although I don't have anything to do with the commercial, but I think that the companies that I started, I think they should do more in making sure that people, once they end the FMD, they can have things that they love, they like, that taste good, that it continues helping them in different ways, but that in support of this FMD.
Thank you. Is it safe to fast when you have adrenal or cortisol dysregulation?
Well, any dysregulation of any kind, I think it's important to talk to your physician, talk to your dietitian. And I understand lots of times, people do, I have cancer patient and patient with autoimmunities, et cetera, et cetera. They come to me and say, I did that, and they have no idea. And what I do now. Yeah. So come to the clinic. We have a createcures.org. It's a nonprofit clinic in Santa Monica. You can do telemedicine. Yeah, if you get to that point, then talk to our dietitians. They know what they're doing, and they know about fasting, and they'll try to talk to your physician and figure out. So this is not the kind of thing you want to do on a podcast or on a presentation like this. You want to see what the problem is, what the potential side effects of doing fasting mimicking diets are going to be, and then very carefully proceed. Sometimes we do like let's try one day and then go to 2 and then go to. This is how we did it back in the days with the cancer patients, right? So it's like a clinical trial with one patient.
So we speak so much about whole grains. I'm just curious about what you think of gluten-free diets. And I mean, obviously, if somebody has celiac or has a gluten intolerance, they have to stay away from whole grains. But do you have any thoughts on just gluten-free in general and whole grains?
Yeah, obviously. So if you have celiac disease, but also if you have sensitivity to gluten, lots of people may not develop celiac disease, but they don't feel good with gluten.
Right.
But I would take my time and be careful, right? Because if you stop enjoying your diet, you're gonna struggle, right? So it's very important that you don't go into a gluten-free diet unless you need to go to a gluten-free diet, or tomato-free diet, or nut-free diet, or soy-free diet. It's all, or quinoa-free diet, right? So there's a lot of things that bother a lot of people, right? So the estimation is probably, more than 15-20% of the population may have some form of intolerance, allergy, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, so if gluten is the molecule that your immune system is recognizing or it might not like, then you can try to lower it and see what happens. And then once you establish, and this process could take you a year or 2, right, before you get rid of it. Say, okay, let me try just changing the gluten or no gluten and go back and forth 3 or 4 times, 1 week without it, 1 week. So every time, if you just exclude the gluten, you feel much better. I mean, there are tests that you can do too now, right? But if you don't do the test, you can at least do that. And then, yeah, it may be that you just have to be in a gluten-free or very low gluten diet, or in a nightshade free or very low nightshade diet, or tomato skin, or quinoa, et cetera, or lactose, right? I mean, these are not novel. I always say 100% of the Norwegians are going to be lactose tolerant, and 100% or close to the Japanese are going to be lactose intolerant. So if you're 100% Japanese, most likely you're going to start with intolerance. And so if you live in the United States and you just have milk dairies all day long, you're going to have a problem, right? Most likely. I mean, not for sure, but most likely.
Okay. So any studies on HIV and FMD coming up? Any
We
studies?
always talked about that, and there was a colleague in the Keck School of Medicine that wanted to do that, and we never got that going just because it's so hard to get clearance to do HIV. So she will have had to do all the studies. So we do almost everything else, but the ones like COVID and HIV where you need clearance, very special clearance to have these viruses in your lab. Yeah, so that's a little harder to do. Yeah.
So a question I get very often, so I'm doing FMD, and what happens if I have a little green juice or I have some bone broth or things that are allowable on other fasting regimens? Will this impact my results?
You cannot have it. That's just as simple as that, right? You
Cannot
cannot
have
have it. And I think part of the FMD, beside the clinical trials and the FDA process and all of that, is also to get people say coffee. Can I have coffee? And I say, yeah, if you're about to quit the FMD, then you can have one coffee. But the idea is to also get you away from all these things, that you think you must have, right, all the time. And that's important, right? That's important if you think you must have something every day, 3 times a day, finding the strength to get away from it for 5 days, I think is important. Now, yeah, if you're gonna quit doing it because you can't take it anymore, then you gotta do what you gotta do. That's okay. You're not gonna die from eating crackers or eating. There was a famous model that did the FMD years ago, and at some point she called me. It's like, I gotta have some crackers, and so I said, okay.
So
And she's like, otherwise I'm gonna stop. And I was like, okay, have the crackers. It's okay.
But you will get kicked out of that fast if you have anything extra.
Well, not necessarily, right? Not necessarily, but you are. So if you have the crackers, of course, right? But if you had some juice, you may not get kicked out, but it may completely alter for whatever reasons, right? So in one of my first meetings with FDA consultants, I told them, well, I know how it works, right? So I was basically assuming that the way we think the FMD works is the way that it works. And he came back, in a former director in one of these branches, and he came back and said, no, you don't know that, right? So you think you know, but what if you have an ingredient? What if the L drink was responsible for 50% of the effects, right? And what if the presence of spinach happens to inhibit, because lots of these vegetables have prebiotic, they have lots of different vitamins and minerals. So what if there's something in spinach, high levels of spinach, that interferes with some of the key components of this? And now you have that and you have no idea, but this is blocking the effect, right? So this is why it's because people say, oh, it's just fasting. No, it's not, right? So in our study with inflammatory bowel disease, we show that water-only fasting actually increased the leakiness of the gut, and the FMD decreased the leakiness of the gut, right? So why? Well, we suspect is because of the prebiotic on the FMD feeding the lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, building this population in the gut, and that was helping. So right there, just to give you an example, right, which is very surprising. I mean, we're going in the opposite direction.
Yes.
So it's much trickier than you think, and this is why having studies, multiple clinical studies that have always used the same composition are very, very important, because you say, okay, well, if it worked for so many people in all these trials, it must be that this particular composition works. And now, could it work in another version? Yes, it could work, but we don't know. Maybe it won't work.
Okay. And how many times a year do you do this?
I do it, probably 1 or 2 times, right? So 1 or 2 times, one for sure. But I have a longevity diet. I mean, everything else, I do 12 hours. I skip lunch. I mean, so to me, doing too many FMDs is, it's just, it may be too much.
So
Just
why
because
do you,
I don't eat lunch, right? So that's already, and then I have a mostly vegan, diet with lots of legumes, so that my proteins are already fairly low, right at the borderline levels. Yeah, but I think I'm a very special case, so I would say I represent maybe 1 in 1,000 people in the US.
why do you not eat lunch?
Well, I don't eat lunch because I don't want to get in the breakfast skipping zone, right? I don't want to get into the shortened lifespan zone. I don't want to go more than 12 hours of fasting, and I eat lunch during the weekend, but I don't eat lunch. So I thought it was very important to train my brain to not care at all whether I have lunch or not, right? And the lunch Monday through Friday to me is also because I go to work and it makes no difference to me. I have coffee for lunch. I have just a tall coffee for lunch.
Okay.
And so my brain now is trained to not expect anything else, but it's okay either way, right? Because on the weekend I eat it, and it's just that after, and the real struggle that we see a lot of patients that do this is the first month to 2 months.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. Then the brain gets trained, and once it gets trained, there is nothing coming at 12 to 2. Then no problem. Then everything gets adjusted. And now we're starting a large trial with 500 people in southern Italy. So we're going to formalize this, but certainly in the patients that we follow and in myself, it's been working very well. So we hope to confirm it.
Wow. So you have breakfast and you have dinner and coffee in between.
And no, I didn't have a snack at 5 p.m. Right? Yeah. So I have breakfast, I have dinner, I have the coffee at lunch, and a snack at 5.
Okay. Beautiful. Well, this has been amazing. I think we probably need to wrap it up. It's time. So I so appreciate you being here with us today. This has been so informative. I'm sure everyone really enjoyed this, and the recording everyone will receive in about a week. I think what's another question coming in? What do you think is the best snack to have? I have a feeling I know.
I can tell you what my snack is.
Okay, what is
my snack? Is a frisella from southern Italy, whole grain, like dark frisella, and then this 72% almond spread with, believe it or not, sugar, as I don't know, there's maybe like 10% sugars or something.
So it's like an Italian Nutella, a really good Nutella.
No, but a very healthy one, right?
Very healthy.
Pure almonds and a little bit of sugar, and that's it. And I just put a little bit on it, and I think it's one of the best things.
Can I buy this when I go to Italy this summer? Is it?
I'm trying to convince a company that I'm not mentioning to start providing. I mean, my idea is that we should make all these things that I go all over the world, and whether it's Okinawa or South America or Southern Italy or Spain. And when I find these foods, in fact, I have especially made for me and shipped from Italy, right? So because I think it's the best thing. So yeah, hopefully I convince some company to make it available to everybody. And the good news about these things, it can last 6 months, right? So you don't need to keep going to the store, and you can have your reserves there. And
I think great idea. All of your favorite things we need to be bringing into the US.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Longo. This has been an absolute pleasure, and I hope we can do this again sometime soon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Audrey.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.